Welcome everybody to the M&A Forum, Deal Makers at Work. And I just want to just give a quick shout to Kyle and all the great work that he did on sort of all the rebranding and updating the websites. I think it looks fabulous. So thank you so much, Kyle.
Thanks for giving us the opportunity.
Absolutely. So for today, in a rain-soaked Houston environment, we've completed our net weaving led by Bob Vincent. And so we're going to I'll be the host, Austin Tenet, also the secretary of this fine organization. We're going to probably later on hear a few words from Mike Dalkey, but we're in for a real treat today with Wendy Fong, Secrets to Building Effective and Inclusive Teams. Very, very topical at this point. Then we'll wrap up at the end with a few words from Mike and Bob as we wrap up everything. And then, of course, there's our meeting for next month, which would be very interesting to hear. It was funny because any of you who had heard some of the GHP economists at the beginning of the year, man, I think we were in store for like the best year ever, right? So it'll be interesting to see the juxtapositioning now that we're several months into the pandemic. And as always, we like to recognize those folks that really help make the organization go, and those are our sponsors. Several of these folks have been with us for a number of years. We're very, very appreciative to what they do. Special shout out to Walter Ulrich, who's now heading a not-for-profit. And I follow him on LinkedIn, and he and his team are just doing some tremendous work during the pandemic. Kind of getting away from their traditional mission of helping overseas organizations and doing a lot of work here domestically with PPE and some related things like that. Mike or Bob, anything you'd like to share before we kind of get into Wendy's presentation?
Well, let me just welcome everybody, Austin, and then we'll let Bob maybe talk a bit about the scholarship. Again, glad to have everyone, and despite the rain. Wendy had asked me about, we've had to cancel meetings before, Wendy, you're absolutely right. But fortunately, most people are just staying kind of tight. So appreciate everybody joining us. We're all about building this community through trusted relationships among acquisition-focused investors, lenders, brokers, professionals. So that ultimately we get more deals done. That's what it's all about in the small cap space, maybe small middle cap space. I don't know. Two principles that we've built the organization on, going back now over 12 years. The net weaving, which really about listening and trying to figure out how you can help without immediately expecting anything in return. I can't pronounce this Greek's name, but he's one of Plato and Aristotle's associates. And he points out that he's often regretted his speech, but he's never regretted his silence. So something to think about in your networking interactions, listening. It's really focused on the listening and trying to figure out how you can help. Servant leadership is about low ego leadership. And this is from Valerie Kodos, I think it is, gymnastics coach of the century in the Pac-12, actually. Points out after, I think she was there for 25 years or something, that she learned that dogmatic dictators may produce compliant soldiers, but it doesn't develop champions for life. So servant leadership, about developing your organization, your people, and Wendy's going to actually touch on this. I thought this was a kind of a good quote to give her a place to build on for the presentation. So welcome again. I'm going to turn it back to Bob, and I'll come back to you at the very end of the meeting after the presentation. So thanks, Bob. You want to touch base on a couple of business points?
Yeah, I do. Regarding our scholarship, the forum has managed to fund a $1,500 scholarship that we're going to be awarding to a Bauer Business College graduate student at the University of Houston. They're in the process of culling through candidates right now. So pretty soon we're going to try to have an online award ceremony, which we'll announce in our events space on the website and send everybody announcements on that. So you're all invited to participate and congratulate the student and hear a little bit about what he or she has in their plans for the future. We're pretty excited about that. We hope to make that at least an annual event if we can get enough people behind it with enough money. So we'll see how this one goes. The other thing that I'd like to mention is we're holding a board meeting Thursday, and one of the things we're going to discuss is the prospect of putting up a deal display page on our website so that people can post their deals and investors and buyers can call through and see what's going on with us. And we hope that'll help us fulfill our vow to make deals happen in a better way. So stay tuned for that. We'll have some announcements on that. And that's all. Take
Great.
away, Austin.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate that. I'm looking forward to that meeting and discussing that opportunity. Well, good. Well, this is why we're all here. Ms. Wendy Fong, welcome again. Founder and principal of Chief Gig, which is offers fractional business leadership, organizational consulting, and team development to help businesses and the people within them achieve optimum performance and thrive in a dynamic and diverse world. She's got this way extensive profile here, but rather than go through it all, why don't we just introduce her and just let her we'll just see how wonderful she is through the context of her slides. So, I'm a little jealous, Wendy. I like the way that you got that plug in for the RICE program being the top entrepreneurial MBA program in the country. So you got to take it when you can get it, right?
I think I've actually moved up. I don't know how you can move up from number one, but I think it has. No,
there you go.
That's a particular challenge to move up from number one. I guess do you get like an A+ or something? Wendy, I appreciate you offering to provide some remarks and some insight to the folks. Wendy and I met at a net weaving kind of event, 3 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
I think you were with a group called Ardent at the time.
Yes.
You were involved in essentially, I'll call it onboarding of different groups that you were acquiring, the company was acquiring. So you're a veteran of the transition and parts of the M&A particularly, something in the background. And I did notice you were part of something called Brain Check. Now, there's a lot of us on this call that probably could use a brain check. How does all that work? I mean,
yeah.
Yes, I'm in need of that, Mike.
Well, so actually, a plug, since I'm also still a shareholder and investor, but Brain Check is actually a app that you can use on your phone or tablet, and it checks within less than about 7 to 10 minutes how your cognitive is doing compared to previous times, right? So if you're an athlete and you take a baseline test and then you've had an injury on the field, you can actually take it to see if there could be signs of concussion. And it also works for the elderly in terms of tracking their cognitive performance as they age. So it's this amazing thing, and I left Memorial Hermann to go to that startup because I just really believed in how many people it could help. It wasn't the right size for me. I figured out that I need a little more than 10 people in my life. So it didn't work out, wasn't the right size, but I still love the product, really believe in it, and the company's still going. I think they just completed their Series B round of investment.
So this is Russell Mays, but I'll just jump in. And so BrainCheck is actually one of my fractional CFO clients. So,
Oh, wow.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
So I've been working with them for a couple of years now. They're a great company, and yeah, they did just raise 8 million. It was actually a Series A round, but they did 8 million with a million follow on just recently. So, yeah.
Amazing.
So they're well
Check your bank
funded.
account, Wendy.
Their revenues are back on the up and up after taking a little bit of a hit. When physicians' offices closed down in response to COVID, but they're back ahead of where they were pre-COVID now and growing again. So great company.
Small world.
Welcome. Absolutely.
Okay, well, somebody's got to give Wendy control, I think.
So I'm going to stop sharing, Wendy, and I believe you should have now control now, Wendy.
Okay. It says that the host has disabled screen sharing, so I think you have to make me host.
Okay, let me see. That sounds about right. Participants. Okay, I'm making you the host, and you should have control now.
Yep. And you guys should be able to see just a blank screen right now.
Yes.
And I will. Okay, so do you see my presentation? Yes?
Yep, we see it. Yes, yep.
Okay.
There you
Perfect.
go. Go, please.
And I'm not sure how this group likes to interact in terms, I'm pretty interactive with my presentations. So
Wendy, let me jump in there. So what I'd ask to do is that we would, we'll should have some time at the end for Q&A, but if you have anything that comes up in between, please put your comment and or insight or question into the chat box, and then Bob and I will be reviewing the chat, monitoring the chat box throughout, and then at an appropriate stopping point, we may ask you a question or two, if that works for you, Wendy. Okay?
Perfect. That's perfect. Okay.
Thanks much.
Well, thank you everybody for joining, even though it's super rainy and dreary outside. Hopefully it sounds like everybody is in a pretty good place. So I'll get started. I'll take a moment to introduce myself. I do a variety of work on consulting and strategy, culture, and leadership. Additionally, I serve as fractional chief for companies in transitions in various roles from HR, operations to strategy. I first gained my M&A experience when I worked at Memorial Hermann. We rolled up quite a bit of physician groups during my tenure there, utilizing different models. We had a particularly successful model where we would lease a business. So that's akin to kind of dating in the M&A phase, right? They got to keep their branding and their management, and the system would take over the financial aspect of running the business. I also integrated financial roll-ups at Alera Group, which Ardent is a part of, where they had a more laissez-faire approach, focusing only on underperforming firms. So with the different models, I was able to quickly see how people performed under different motivations, which I'm here to talk about today. Just to overview the agenda, I'm going to spend just a tiny little bit of time on the failure and success factors of M&A, and then I'll go into behavioral analytics. So the due diligence, integration, and restructuring, and then culture and team dynamics is where behavioral analytics could really help you. So here, a failed merger or acquisition or divestiture can be understood in two ways. Qualitatively, so whatever the companies had in mind that caused them to engage in M&A in the first place doesn't work out the way in the end, right? Or quantitatively, stakeholders suffer because operating results deteriorate instead of improve. Study after study puts the failure rate of mergers and acquisitions somewhere between 70 to 90%. KPMG did research in 2015 that narrowed the band down to 75 to 83%, but the larger the deal, the higher the chances of failure. So take a moment to and crystallize that in your mind, right? When M&A don't go as planned, how often is it because of people problems? Internal competition that becomes conflict, lack of information, behaviors. So it's not about aptitude or the other things that you might look at during due diligence. So, you know, as people who participate in various stages of M&A, what have you found to be the number one obstacle to a successful deal, regardless of phase you're in? So if you can type that, chat that in the chat box. So the question is, what have you found to be the number one obstacle to a successful deal? Or in thinking about that, maybe what kind of leadership issues did you have or did you face when you're speaking, looking to partner with someone, when you're looking to help integrate someone, or even if you're helping to, or if you're, acquiring or selling. So cultural clashes, Bob says, key employee flight, lack of plan to integrate. Those are perfect. It's like I set you guys up. Owner, CEO feared loss of control. That is a huge one. No matter how much you tell someone that things aren't going to change, they don't internalize it, and somehow that fear causes the erosion, right? Cultural differences lead to subversion of process, loss of key personnel. Those are all really great answers. So here is a chart from Deloitte's State of the Deal report that just came out this year. So as you can see, efficient integration is the key for success of the deal. It accounts for 20% of a successful transaction. So post M&A integration is defined as the implementation of changes. So we're going to focus on the word changes in functional activities, organizational structures, and cultures of the two organizations to expedite their consolidation into a functional whole. So of course, this all involves people, right? And I don't know if you can see the different percentages, but effective integration is 20%. At the same rate is accurately valuing a target. And then a little less is stable regulatory and legislative environment at 17%, 16% for economic certainty, 14% for proper target identification, and then 13% for a sound due diligence process. So while all those contribute to success, effective integration and accurately valuing a target takes the bulk of it.
Hey, Wendy, before you move on,
Sure.
or as you move on, a question came up. Wanted to understand your definition of failure.
So going back to these, I mean, of course, a failure can be quantitative and qualitative. In the actual studies, I think it was that they didn't meet the, stated goals of the merger. And I can actually send you and send everyone the sources for those so that you can look into it further.
Yeah, that'd be great. Send it to either Bob or myself, Austin, and then
Okay.
we'll share it with the community. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I'm making a note. Okay, so today I'm talking to you about a data-driven approach to the people side of things, which is the key to success. So of course there's fit approach. We hire and acquire those who fit our culture, right? There's a track records approach. We hire, acquire the winning horse, allow them to lead us across the finish line. This works to a certain extent, though it comes at a higher cost, and it may alter our original vision as people in different roles have different motivations. And honestly, until 3 years ago, I've done both of these last two approaches. Did we acquire groups that were yellow flags? Absolutely. And looking back, it was because I was so competitive and I wanted to hit my goals, and competitive with myself. There was nobody else competing with me. I just love reaching goals, right? And so overall, was I successful? Yes. But did I make people mistake? Yes. And it was really costly. The other part of my job as an integrator was to make things work. So this is once the acquisition has already happened, and now I need to run the business and hit the projections, right? And usually I'm like a square peg, round hole, no problem. Let me just build all the processes around the peg and make the hole bigger and we'll make it work. But people are messy creatures. And when we're not factoring that in, we have a big blind spot. Sometimes, no matter what we do, it just doesn't work. There's a real blind spot in team and culture fit, especially when the motivations have changed. So I'll tell you from experience, people can say they are workaholics and they love work all day long, but I've never seen a physician's productivity not drop off once it's no longer their business. They could still be working, but maybe now they're paying attention to research or other things. Now that they're not solely responsible for the bottom line, right? And so when there is even just the slightest change in the way we're motivated, productivity changes. So wouldn't it be great to know before meeting with the leadership team or your future partners or whoever it is that you're going to go into business with, what their appetite for risk is, or how they deal with deadlines, or are they proactive or reactive to issues? How they respond to pressure. I would have loved to know all of this information prior to having to bring a team into the fold, right? So what if you can improve the failure rate by even 10% if you have this information ahead of time? Think about what the kind of value that it would bring to your organization. So what I'm proposing is a data-driven, inclusive approach. And there's a tool out there to help you on the front end and in due diligence or on the back end. And actually, I'm going to pause here because I think there's somebody waiting to come in. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. So predictive index is a behavioral assessment that takes less than 6 minutes to complete. It can help you gain insight on many different aspects of your work environment. There are 3 measures that I love that have the greatest influence on workplace behavior. And that's orientation to work, whether you are task or people oriented, pace of work, whether you're kind of a sequential worker or multitasker, and then what I see as the biggest indicator of partners getting along, and that's appetite for risk. This is an instrument that can fit into your overall strategy, no matter what stage you're in. So once we have, so let's say we have the behavioral analytics data. Here are some uses for it. Due diligence. You can unearth hidden vulnerabilities and risk. Determine what is the likelihood that the leadership team can enact change. So some of our PE and VC clients are more likely to step away from a deal because of unsuitable profiles within leadership. So if they think that the CEO and CFO have the wrong profiles, they can lose up to 18 months of their time in the turnaround because these 2 positions are critical, right? This is also extremely important if you will be operating the company. It can help you answer the question. I mean, of course, if you're looking at going into business with someone, you already like them as people, right? But do we know? It's sort of like you don't really know your partner until you live together. Do we really want to go into the business with this group, and is it worth the investment? So in this presentation, though, I'll focus on the following 2 topics: integration and restructuring. So gaining insights into potential employees more thoroughly. Use awareness to inform integration and restructuring approach, which is, some of the most important issues that you guys brought up. And then team dynamics and inclusion. So quickly engage employees in sharing a common language and gaining mutual behavioral understanding of their strengths and potential to optimize performance. Okay, so integration and restructuring. So here are some startling facts about engagement. And we kind of mentioned that earlier when Anthony said owner and CEO feared loss of control, right? There's a 23% increase in actively disengaged employees after a change event, even if no one's job is affected. I can't tell you how true this is. No matter how much you communicate with employees, many people inherently fear change. They fear the unknown. At one company, prior to me joining, they had a huge exodus during and after being acquired because they had not messaged the change well. But then there was also this mistrust, right? There was not this information. There's not this, my job is going to stay the same. So, you know, they rather go to what they know than wait for the unknown. It takes about 3 years to return to pre-merger engagement levels. And since many deals have a 3-year payout horizon, this is very interesting and significant. And then executives attribute 72% of the company's value to employees, yet a mere 12% of companies align their talent strategy with their business strategy. So how do we solve that? So within Predictive Index, there are 4 different leadership styles, and depending on the opportunity, the right leader could look a lot different. What if I could tell you, what if you could tell if a leader looked at a problem first and then brought the people in to solve it, or if they're a leader who gathers the people to solve the problem together? The former would be best if you're trying to stabilize or produce, right? If you're trying to stabilize a company, if you're trying to go lean, or if you're trying to, move quickly on sales. But the latter would actually be better if you're cultivating and exploring. If you're a startup and you're exploring new verticals, new industries, new things. So if we have the right leadership in place for the change that we're looking at to embark on, it's more than half the battle. The other half is the team. So, we talked about disengagement. There are actually 4 factors of disengagement. So 1, misalignment with the job. Poorly defined positions, sloppy hiring processes, or evolving business needs create a mismatch between employees and their roles. And of course, this is all exacerbated when we have a change event like M&A. Lack of job fits directly impacts motivation and productivity, and I'm sure you all know that. Misalignment with the manager. So the relationship between employees and their managers is critical, yet managers are poorly equipped or not trained to effectively understand their employees' individual needs. So many still manage with a one-size-fits-all approach, but that's like giving everybody size 11 shoes. They don't fit. And I actually got that quote from a fellow NetWeaver, Lee Ellis from Atlanta, who wrote Leading with Courage, I believe. He's a war veteran. But so they struggle to communicate with and motivate their employees. So the third is misalignment with the team. Team-based work is more critical than ever, yet poor communication, insufficient collaboration, and inability to manage the tensions inherent to teamwork continue to extract a massive tax on productivity and innovation. And especially now, because we're remote, it is so difficult to resolve these tensions. You can't just stop by someone's desk. You can't just go to lunch. There's not these micro moments where you can, have some sort of relief, right? It just keeps building. And then we're all stressed out with what's the weather, with COVID, with racial inequity. So there's just a lot going on, especially with teams right now. And then lastly, misalignment with culture. So to be productive and engaged, employees need to feel that they belong. And when they feel out of tune with their organization's values, or when they lose trust in leadership, their own performance suffers. And that can create a toxic environment that undermines productivity. Okay. So while it's true that some failures can be attributed to financial and market factors, many studies are pointing to the neglect of human resource issues as the main reason for M&A failures, right? And I showed that earlier. So some of these are just, as we've gone over, lack of communication, lack of direct involvement by HR, lack of training, loss of key people and talented employees. Somebody mentioned that earlier. Loss of customers, and then corporate cultural clash, another one that was mentioned earlier. So another factor, though, that we may not be focused on right now in term, especially during this, huge change, right, is diversity. So there's no question that diversity wins when it comes to the financial performance of a company. This data is from an annual McKinsey study, and it reaffirms the strong business case for both gender diversity and ethnic and cultural diversity in corporate leadership year after year. So looking at the difference between the top and bottom quartile performance, in 2019, companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on executive teams were 25% more likely to have above average profitability than companies in the bottom quartile. And then in the case of ethnic and cultural diversity, the top quartile companies were 36% more likely to have an above average profitability than companies in the bottom quartile. But if you think that just hiring people and sticking them in there will give you, better financial profits, it actually doesn't work that way. So I am going to give you a little bit, a few notes on diversity. So a person on their own cannot be diverse. It often happens to people of color when they say, well, Wendy's diverse. Since I'm one person, I cannot be diverse. I just have my own lived experiences, right? So a group can be diverse or not diverse, but one person of color may be underrepresented or marginalized. But I cannot replace the diversity that comes with many people that make up a diverse group. So I cannot speak for Black people, LGBTQ, or other marginalized groups. The harm comes when the burden of diversity falls on this one person. Their contributions to an organization need to be more than just that they bring diversity to the table. So I think it's really important to get that concept right. Secondly, diversity is much tougher to manage than a homogeneous group. So we know that we can do better financially with diversity, but people don't talk about how much harder it is to manage more diversity in our organizations, right? We don't talk about the challenges it brings to your day-to-day work. It's much easier to have 20 people who have the same lived experiences. When you're lacking diversity and have a homogeneous group, you will build consensus pretty quickly. There might not be as much conflict, as much difference of opinions. But when we say we'll invest in diversity, we care about diversity, you have to know that diversity creates more room for conflict, misunderstandings, cross-cultural challenges, more that people don't share, which creates difficult conversations. And that's happening in our offices now. When there's diversity, we can't ignore what's going on outside our office walls, right? So it takes a lot of skill and intentionality to manage this. And a lot of this actually falls on middle management, where they've never learned these skills and they don't have the support to manage it. So hiring diversely without the culture of inclusion creates harm for underrepresented folks. So for companies to reach the benefit that diversity brings, they really truly have to embrace inclusivity. And this kind of brings us back to earlier, before the meeting started, when you guys were talking about the gentleman who consults companies on how to onboard people on the autism spectrum, right? Like they can't just bring, autistic people in and then say, okay, this is the job. Like it has to be inclusive if they want to be inclusive. So that was a perfect kind of example for that. So I have a question. What about diversity of past experience? Absolutely. And I actually have a 3-part series, so I could talk like for many, many hours on this. But yes, diversity of past experience is amazing, and that's why it leads to higher performing teams. So, so while the PI tools, predictive index tools, were not designed specifically for diversity and inclusion purposes, they can help promote an inclusion by objectively matching the right person to the right job, regardless of race, religion, sexual orientation, or gender, and inspiring a diverse range of perspectives. So this is just a sample of some of the reports. Here you can see my reports. I'm a Maverick, which is an exploring profile, and it's great for innovation, right? But it also tells me over here and I don't know if you can see, it might be a little blurry. It tells me that I may be seen as overly aggressive and intimidating the staff. Of course, it gives me self-coaching tips down here so that I can continuously self-check, because let's face it, we all need reminders of how to be better humans, right? So here is the report that can tell you, if I'm comfortable with risk, if I'm proactive or reactive, formal or informal, quick to connect, or, takes a long time to connect. You definitely, if you're in sales, you definitely want someone who's quick to connect. Same with, social workers, right? Whether you're task-oriented or people-oriented, and then casual or careful roles. So here are just some ways that we can reduce bias and start to build an inclusive culture. The first is to have an objective recruitment process. Using PI as a recruitment tool, we have a job targeting process to create a job profile. So you can have multiple contributors, from the hiring manager to someone currently in the role to people who interact with them. They can all provide feedback as a group and gain alignment around the role's priorities. So this basically helps us create a profile of who we're looking for. And it achieves, objectivity, right, prior to deciding to meet any candidates. You also want to challenge that job requirements are actually legitimate, like lifting 40-pound boxes for 8 hours a day in a warehouse when there are now robots and conveyor belts who do most of the heavy lifting. You can ensure that nice to haves and needs to have are not limiting. So for example, recruiting from only Ivy Leagues when there's not racial equity in the process of entering and graduating from those schools. Let's see, I have a question here. How does the predictive index compare to the Berkman? I'm actually not too familiar with the Berkman, but for me, the reason I specifically like predictive index is because it only takes 5, I say 6 minutes, that's the average, but it's just 2 questions. And it's extremely, it's so focused on what's, related to business, right? And so I've actually used this to help partners not break up. I say, like, I'm like the therapist for your work family, because I was able to help identify the proactiveness and reactiveness, as well as the risk, right? Comfortable with risk and not comfortable with risk. And so when we had one proactive, I'll give you an example. We had one proactive leader who was very comfortable with risk, and the other 3 were all reactive, and they were all not very comfortable with risk. So the one leader kept thinking that I can't lead these people. They're not responding to me. Everything that I bring up to move the organization forward, they're just not interested in. But once we did the PI and realized where they are on that continuum of risk, we were able to put structures in place to say, how many new initiatives can one bring up, in a quarter? What is the process of vetting these? So they're not the people who are going to be okay with getting 5 new ideas in their inbox, every week, right? But if it's a structured process, then we can talk about it and we can be more open-minded about it, right? So let's see.
Hey, Wendy, it's awesome. Got about 4.5 more minutes, okay? For
Okay.
Q&A? Okay.
Sure.
Thanks.
Sure. So once a candidate takes the assessment, you will see in the software a match to the job profile that was created. So my practice is that I interview people with all people with scores of 9 or 10, and I send them all invites to book a phone interview. I do this prior to reviewing any resumes to prevent bias. And you can do the same process with promotions as well, which will expand your shortlist objectively. So other ways to promote inclusion are blinded resumes or group interviews. I mentioned that I have a workshop series that helps company bring racial equity into their organization. So if you're interested in that, please reach out. I'd love to tell you more about it. And that actually, great timing, includes my presentation. I would actually like to invite everyone who attended to take the predictive index assessment. It's free, and I can send you all, I can send Bob a link afterwards that he can disseminate to everyone. And then I'd also like to invite you to talk to me about assessing your teams to see how we can uncover any blind spots and improve team dynamics. So should I move to the questions that are in the chat, Austin?
Yeah. If
Okay. So here, how and when do you introduce the assessment tool in the transition process? So preferably before they're acquired, because what you want is to be able to look at all of the bench strength, right? So you don't, maybe the leader isn't, you know, a change agent, but maybe someone underneath them is. And if you can identify that person within the other company, it'll make the connection so much easier because they're also change agents, they're also quick to connect, and you can work together. Okay, anyone else?
So I'm always curious. When this is also, so I'm always curious. So when you've done let's say the predictive index and some of the other things that you've talked about here, and as you maybe fast forward a year after the combination of companies, what's kind of been the anecdotal experience of what you've seen after you've done kind of running your process with companies?
Yeah, so one thing that I've seen is that the resulting merged company, they bond better because, you know, you have, like I said, you have a common language, right? And I'll go back to this slide. Oops, this slide. You know, you can say, oh my gosh, you know, you're a maverick too. So we've done workshops where, you know, you kind of group together and then you kind of share your experiences and you have common language. Hey, you know, I have this challenge as well. How do you deal with, you know, your supervisor when you have this challenge, right? And so there's just more bonding and more sharing, and people start to look at challenges for the way we have it, you know, cautions as not cautions, but let me help you, you know, improve on that. And so I would say that there is just a lot. It's a lot easier for people to talk about their challenges, and so, you know, the bonding becomes much faster.
Thank you.
And okay, so you mentioned Leading with Courage. Who was the author and any insights into the background? Yes, so he was a prisoner of war in the Vietnam War, and he actually was a POW with John McCain. His name is Lee Ellis, and he's in the CEO NetWeavers group in Atlanta. And he uses the kind of the analogy of, you know, how they led in the POW camps to business leadership. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm writing a question now for you.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Wendy, in my practice, I share with you the power of assessments because the beauty
Can I
of
ask a question again?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Wendy. Thank you. So you see, I would like to go back to your question, to your definition about failure that you mentioned at the beginning.
Yes.
So you see teams in a company, even after years of merger, they still tell you that I am from company X, and that guy is company Y. So there was company X and company Y that merged long time ago,
Yes.
and still teams in that company identify themselves from the original company, not from the existing current company.
Yes.
So is this also a sign of failure? Is this has the synergies not fully implemented? Although the company now could be doing very well, but what's your take on that, please?
So that actually is kind of the difference in the model of integration, right? So some models, like I said, I'll just take Memorial Hermann, for example, because they had all three models within one place. So one model is I am leasing this company, I'm leasing this physician group, and you're still called, Dr. XYZ, and we're still called Dr. Memorial Hermann, but we've essentially taken over all of the business aspect of it, and we're just paying for your expenses, right? And so in that sense, it was never the intent to, merge. It was never intent to say, hey, you're now part of Memorial Hermann. The intent was that we're going to get, a certain value over what you were able to get, because of better efficiencies, better contracting, and that sort of thing, right? But then there are other mergers where it is really intended to become one. And so if that was the intent, and years later they're still saying, oh, we were the original so-and-so, then yeah, that I would probably say that, that could be a failure of not making everyone feel like they belong, right? Not creating a new identity where people could join in. And so you still have this one group who says, well, we were the original, so-and-so, and they were, XYZ. So in thinking about that, I think Cooper's Industries, so in grad school, they were a really great example of how they acquired and integrated so efficiently that everybody just, came under the fold. They are now Cooper's people, and their productivity never, decreased. So it really depends on, I guess, the intent of it.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I know about Cooper Industry case, by the way, and could this be repaired, or it will forever be I belong to that company, I don't belong to this company?
It absolutely can be repaired, and so unfortunately, if something's not broken, a lot of people don't think that they should fix it, right? And so it depends on leadership if they feel that this is broken. But if they do think, hey, if we get everybody to belong, we'll have less turnover, we'll have more, people working together, different teams being comfortable working together, it definitely can be repaired.
I think that the key issue there is that even Henry mentioned that the company may be doing okay, maybe doing better, whatever, but that lack of joint identity or common identity, and this is talking about teams in companies, but we could talk about nations, particularly ours right now, frankly. You lose the best. And back to your diversity point, Wendy, you lose the best. You lose the opportunity to meld practice A and practice B from ConocoPhillips. I think was one of the famous ones where you could, no matter what, somebody would say, no, I'm a Phillips guy, I'm a Conoco guy.
Right.
It's a long time afterward. And so Conoco always did things this way, and that's the way we're going to do them. And you never get the group to pull together and figure out what's the best way, and maybe it's some blend of what Conoco used to do and what Phillips used to do. So
absolutely. And going back to this slide, when you are merging, if the reason you're merging was to stabilize, right, to lower costs, and make sure that things are well coordinated and efficient, that's what people are going to focus on. And you'll probably have a stabilizing leader who does that really well. But that person is not going to be the person who cultivates who creates this joint identity, right? And so really, we want to look at what is the objective of bringing these people together, and how can we have the right leaders in place. So, and you can have a team, a leadership team that has, someone from each of these profiles, right? But we can't really do that when, companies come with an existing team. So what I recommend is looking at bench strength to see, okay, is there a vice president? Is there a manager or director who can really step up and take on this project? Because what I'm guessing, and it's probably true, that your stabilizing leader isn't really interested in that.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Wendy. And again, the cultivation is important because it will also help with the bottom line.
Yes, for sure, because that's where your inclusion. That's where, like as Mike said, the inclusion happens.
Yeah. I mean, my case was Chevron, Texaco. Here we are 20 years later, and they still say, I am Texaco, I'm not Chevron. Although the company is doing well, this is what we see from outside, but still you have this division inside the company.
Right.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, Wendy, that was awesome. Thank you, and look forward to those value-added goodies you're going to share with those of us here and the rest of the organization.
Awesome.
So, yeah. So, Wendy, if you be so kind as to pass back the okay, and then
I think you have it now.
Thank you, I do.
Okay.
And I'll share the screen. Thank you so much. So we want to thank our guests for today, all those that registered for our event today. This was very enlightening. So again, many thanks again, Wendy, for your sharing and some of the value add. And then Mike, would you like to share the final thought?
I don't know why that comes out so weird on the screen, but yeah, show us that mountain. We want to leave, despite the rain. At least here in Houston. I don't think Midland gets any, Henry, but here in Houston it's raining. Want to leave with at least, looks like we're getting some sunshine across the mountain here. It's been very interesting. We just talked about teams and people who stay in their own silos, I guess is the way to think about it. Came across this quote from Hamilton. We keep talking about we're in this together, we're going to solve this together here than commercials and so forth. And yet it seems like so many times we're going in as a populace, I guess maybe a better way to say it, we're going in at least two different directions, maybe 3 or 4 or 10, I don't know. But Hamilton warned, and this was literally what, 240 years ago, that if the states, he was talking about at that point, don't unite, that the divisions will subject them to mischiefs of foreign influence and intrigue. Does any of that sound familiar at this point in time? I'll take just a second, because in the last 48 hours, maybe, I've had 3 people comment somewhat along the lines of an extremely successful gentleman that I heard this morning on the Business Channel, CNBC. Long interview, and at the end, this guy, which again, I won't name him, but he is extremely successful, well known for decades. And in fact, he's known as a very successful acquisition guy. Said that he wished he could somehow go to sleep and wake up on the 15th of November, because the anxiety of the environment, the anxiety that the environment is creating is really, really getting to him. And honestly, again, he was the 3rd person in 48 hours that said essentially the same thing to me. So it's getting to the point where we got to try and figure out how to get back together, and hopefully Mr. Hamilton's advice 240 years ago will help us think about it in those terms. So next meeting is the 27th, I think, of October. It's the fourth Tuesday in any event in October. We've got, I'm going to get her, it's Bethany Miller from the Greater Houston Partnership is going to be our speaker. Looking forward to that very much. And Wendy, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you particularly for smiling as much as you have in this dreary day. I really appreciate it. So, Bob, anything else? Or otherwise, somebody, Ralston can close us down. But thanks, everybody.
Let me just say add my thanks to Wendy. It was having gone through several mergers and acquisitions, it was somewhat familiar to me what you had to say, and some of it was very enlightening. So looking forward to seeing the stuff you're going to send us, and we'll get it out to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, thanks so much for joining. And I think next month won't be quite as good as Wendy's presentation today, but we'll be able to pose that question that I've been asked 1,000 times since March 15th. When are we going to return to normal? So if an economist can't answer that, then there's got to be no answer. So saying thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you all next month. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Everyone.
Yeah.